The sun draped itself across the rolling fields of rural Georgia, its golden rays weaving through the tall grasses and catching the edges of wildflowers that lined Highway 17. In the driver's seat of a 1985 Cadillac Eldorado, Amir Hossein, 72, kept his hands steady on the wheel, though his knees ached from decades spent standing at drafting tables, sketching designs that had once helped propel NASA's shuttles into the stars. The car's cream-colored paint gleamed under the afternoon light, a testament to years of careful maintenance, a symbol of a life built against the odds. Beside him, Leila, his wife of 45 years, hummed softly to an old Persian love song crackling through the radio, her fingers tracing the worn leather spine of a journal in her lap. It was their anniversary, a day carved out for quiet joy, a drive to their favorite diner, a shared slice of pecan pie, and memories of a love that had weathered revolutions, oceans, and the slow grind of prejudice. But as the Cadillac hummed down the two-lane road, a police cruiser's flashing lights sliced through the calm, and within minutes, 2 officers would accuse them of stealing their car, their Iranian heritage twisted into a question mark of suspicion. What those officers didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that the man pulling into the diner's gravel lot was their son, Keon, an Air Force veteran and lawyer, his boots about to hit the ground with the weight of justice. This wasn't just a Sunday drive. It was about to become a reckoning. Amir's eyes, framed by lines etched from years of squinting over blueprints, flicked to the rearview mirror as the cruiser's lights pulsed closer. His heart quickened, not with guilt but with a familiar unease, one he hadn't felt so sharply in years. He'd come to America in 1976, a young engineer fleeing the shadow of revolution in Iran, carrying little more than a suitcase, a degree, and a stubborn hope for a better life. Leila, sitting beside him, her silver hair catching the sunlight like a halo, had been his partner through every storm job rejections in the early days when his accent marked him as other, apartment denials when landlords saw their foreign names, the hissed slurs in grocery stores after 9/11. They'd built a life despite it all, raising 2 children. Buying this Cadillac with savings scraped together over years of skipped vacations and second-hand furniture. The car was more than metal and chrome. It was their pride, their proof of endurance. They'd driven their son Keon to college in it, taken their grandchildren to the Georgia coast, listened to their laughter echo in the back seat. Now, on this Sunday in 2025, they were headed to Millie's Diner, a roadside relic where they'd shared their first date decades ago, where the coffee was strong and the pecan pie was sweet enough to make you forget the world's sharp edges. Leila's hum turned into a soft chuckle as she opened her journal, its pages yellowed with age, filled with pressed flowers and handwritten notes from their early years in America. "You remember when you spilled coffee on your tie at Millie's?" she teased, her voice warm, carrying the faintest trace of her Tehran childhood. Amir grinned, his eyes crinkling. "And you still married me." The memory felt like a shield, wrapping them in the comfort of their shared history. The Cadillac's engine purred as they turned off Highway 17, the gravel lot of Millie's Diner crunching under their tires. The diner hadn't changed in years. Its neon sign flickered with nostalgia, the chipped red paint on the wooden siding peeling like old memories, the scent of fried okra and honeysuckle drifting through the air. A sprawling pecan tree cast, dappled shade over the lot, its branches heavy with late summer nuts. Amir parked carefully, easing the car into a spot near the entrance. He reached for his cane, its polished wood worn smooth by years of use, and stepped out to help Leila from the passenger seat. Her laughter was soft as she took his arm, her steps steady but slow, the grace of a woman who'd long ago stopped caring what the world thought of her. They were steps from the diner's patio, Leila pointing at a patch of wildflowers by the road. Those look like the ones we used to pick for Kian's school projects, when the screech of tires shattered the moment. A police cruiser swerved into the lot, kicking up a cloud of dust that stung their eyes. Amir froze, his hand tightening on his cane. Leila's smile faded, her fingers digging into his arm. Two officers stepped out, their movements sharp, deliberate. The older one, Officer Daniels, was tall, his buzz-cut hair glinting in the sun, a smirk playing on his lips that didn't reach his cold blue eyes. The younger, Officer Reed, had a restless energy, his hand hovering near his holster, his jaw working a piece of gum with a rhythm that felt like a countdown. Neither spoke at first, their boots crunching on the gravel as they approached the Cadillac. Daniels pointed at the car, his voice flat. "Is this your car?" Amir blinked, caught off guard by the question. "Yes, sir. Been hours since '99. His tone was polite, measured, the way he'd learned to speak in moments like this. Moments that had dotted their lives in America. Moments when his accent, his name, his skin seemed to invite scrutiny. Leila stepped closer to him, her posture straight despite the tremor in her hands. Reed circled the Cadillac, squinting at the license plate as if it held secrets. "Doesn't check out," he said, his voice clipped. "System says this plate's tied to a stolen vehicle." The words landed like a slap, sharp and surreal. Leila's breath caught. "That's impossible," she said, her voice calm but firm, the nurse in her rising to keep panic at bay. "We have the title at home. You can check the VIN." Daniels didn't respond, just stepped closer, his shadow falling over Amir like a storm cloud. "Convenient," he said, his smirk deepening. "You got any ID?" Amir reached for his wallet, his movements slow, deliberate, aware that any sudden motion could be misinterpreted. He'd learned that lesson long ago, in the early days when a traffic stop could turn into a lecture on fitting in. Reed, meanwhile, was already at the car, opening the driver's side door without asking, his hands rifling through the glove box. Papers spilled onto the seat, gas receipts, an old map, a photograph. Reed held up the photo, his eyes narrowing. It was Amir, young and defiant, standing in a Tehran street in 1979, holding a protest sign against the Shah's regime. "What's this?" Reed asked, his tone sharp, almost accusatory. "Some kind of activist history." Amir's jaw tightened, a flicker of anger breaking through his calm. "That's my past," he said, his voice low but steady. "This is my car." The photograph was a relic of a life left behind, a moment of courage from a young man who'd stood up to tyranny, before building a new life in a country that promised freedom but often delivered suspicion. Leila's hand found his, her touch grounding him. "We've done nothing wrong," she said, her voice cracking just slightly. Not from fear, but from the weight of having to say those words again, decades after they'd thought the worst was behind them. The officers didn't pause. Daniels grabbed Amir's arm, pulling him toward the cruiser with a force that made Leila gasp. "Step back, sir," he said, the words less a request than a command. Reed snapped at Leila. "Ma'am, stay out of this." The air grew thick, the heat of the Georgia sun pressing down as the confrontation escalated. A crowd began to gather, drawn by the cruiser's flashing lights and the officers' raised voices. Locals stepped out of the diner, their coffee cups forgotten, their eyes wide with curiosity and unease. A young woman, Maya, a journalist with a local blog, pushed through the crowd. Her phone already recording, her dark eyes sharp with purpose. Whispers rippled through the onlookers. That's the Hosinas. They've lived here forever. Why are they messing with them? A waitress in a flour-dusted apron lingered by the diner's door, her hands twisting nervously. I've never seen them treat anyone like this, she murmured to a cook beside her. Amir stood still, his hands raised slightly, not in surrender, but in an attempt to de-escalate a situation that felt like it was spiraling out of control. His heart pounded beneath his faded button-down shirt. Not from guilt, but from a fear he hadn't felt in decades, the kind that whispered, "It doesn't matter who you are, what you've done, or how long you've lived. They only see your name, your skin." Leila watched as Reed rifled through the Cadillac's trunk, pulling out a blanket, a spare tire, and a box of old cassette tapes. The car was their history, their sanctuary. And now it was being dissected like evidence in a crime they hadn't committed. She remembered the day they bought it, how they'd driven it home under a starlit sky, dreaming of the future. They'd driven Kian to his first day of law school in it, watched their grandchildren nap in the back seat during road trips. Now, it was being treated like a stolen object, their lives reduced to a system error. Daniels held up the Tehran photograph again, waving it like a piece of damning evidence. "You expect us to believe this car's yours when you've got this in here," he said, his voice dripping with skepticism. Amir's voice was steady, though his hands trembled with restraint. "That photo is from 1979. I was 26. It has nothing to do with this car." Leila stepped forward, her composure cracking. "Those are our memories," she snapped, her voice trembling with fury. "This is our car. This is our life. You don't get to treat us like criminals." Daniels's eyes narrowed, his smirk fading into something harder. "We'll see what the system says," he said, the word system hitting Amir like a punch. Amir had fought systems his whole life, systems that told him he didn't belong, that his accent was a liability, that his name was a red flag. He'd fought them with quiet persistence, with late-night studying, with years of proving his worth at NASA, where his designs had helped launch missions to the stars. Leila had fought beside him, working grueling shifts as a nurse, caring for patients others ignored, enduring the whispers of colleagues who questioned her place in American hospitals. They'd raised Kian and his sister Zara to believe in justice, to stand tall, to never let the world's biases define them. And now, in the autumn of their lives, here was the system again, wearing a badge, standing in a gravel lot, accusing them of stealing the very life they'd built. The crowd grew thicker, their murmurs turning to mutters of disbelief. Maya's camera captured every moment Daniels's aggressive posture, Reed's careless rummaging, Leila's trembling hands. Her live stream was gaining traction, comments popping up. "This is outrageous. They're just having coffee. Why are they doing this?" A man in a trucker hat stepped closer, his voice low but firm. "I know Amir. He fixed my son's bike last summer. Ain't no thief." A woman with a stroller nodded. "Leila brought us soup when my mum was sick. They're good people." The support was a lifeline, but it couldn't erase the humiliation, unfolding in real time. Reed pulled a notebook from the glove box, flipping through it as if expecting to find a confession. "No registration," he said, almost triumphant. Amir's voice was calm but firm. "It's at home, in our file cabinet. You're welcome to check the VIN." Daniels ignored him, his hand still on Amir's arm, guiding him toward the cruiser. "We need to sort this out," he said, his tone implying guilt was already decided. Leila's eyes filled with tears, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of the moment. "We've survived worse," she whispered to Amir, her voice barely audible. Let them do what they want. But she was wrong. They'd survived discrimination, suspicion, and the constant need to prove themselves. This was different. This was public, deliberate, a spectacle designed to strip them of dignity in front of strangers. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, a slow burn of anger replacing curiosity. Maya's livestream hit 1,000 viewers, her caption stark, elderly, couple harassed by police in Georgia. This is their car. Comments poured in, some furious, some heartbroken. This is 2025, and we're still doing this. That man's face, he doesn't deserve this. A teenage boy in the crowd raised his phone, recording alongside Maya, his hands shaking with indignation. The waitress by the door wiped her eyes, her voice breaking as she spoke to the cook. They come here every month. Always tip, always smile. This ain't right. Amir's hands trembled, not from age, but from the effort to stay calm. This is ridiculous, he said, more to himself than anyone. 45 years of paying taxes, raising a family, contributing to this town, and I'm a suspect. Daniels ignored him, now holding the Tehran photograph up to the light, as if it held the key to some hidden crime. Who's this guy? He asked, pointing at the young Amir in the image. That's me, Amir said, his voice steady but laced with exhaustion. I was fighting for freedom before you were born. The words hung in the air, a quiet rebuke to the officer's assumptions. Leila's composure cracked further, her voice rising. Those are our memories, our life. You don't get to tear through them like they're nothing. Reed snapped back, Ma'am, we're doing our job. Stay out of it. The crowd gasped, a collective intake of breath. The waitress stepped forward, her apron twisted in her hands. You're doing your job wrong, she said, her voice trembling but clear. The crowd murmured in agreement, their phones raised higher, their eyes locked on the scene. Maya's stream hit 2,000 viewers. The comments, a flood of outrage and support. The tension was a living thing, coiling tighter with each passing second. Amir stood straighter, his cane planted firmly in the gravel, his eyes meeting Daniels's, with a defiance that belied his age. Leila's hand was still in his, her grip fierce, as if anchoring them both to the life they built. The officers seemed oblivious to the growing crowd. Their focus narrowed to the Cadillac, to the photograph, to the narrative they'd already written in their minds. They didn't see the diner's owner, a grey-haired man named Earl, watching. From the doorway, his arms crossed, his face tight with disapproval. They didn't see the truck driver clenching his fists, or the woman with the stroller whispering to her husband, or Maya's camera capturing every flinch, every word. Then, a low rumble cut through the era-black SUV pulling into the lot, its tires crunching gravel with purpose. The crowd parted, heads turning, eyes widening. The driver's door opened, and Kian Hosseini stepped out. His Air Force uniform pristine, the silver bars on his shoulders catching the sunlight. His boots hit the ground like a gavel, each step deliberate, his presence shifting the air like a storm breaking. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his dark eyes burning with a quiet intensity that made even Daniels pause. Keon's gaze swept the scene, his parents, stiff and silent beside their car. The officers, one holding a photograph, the other rummaging through the trunk. The crowd, phones raised, faces a mix of anger and hope. He locked eyes with Leila first, then Amir, a silent promise passing between them. I've got you, officers. Keon said, his voice like steel, measured but unyielding. What's going on here? The question wasn't just a request for information. It was a challenge, a line drawn in the gravel. Daniels faltered, his hand dropping from Amir's arm. Reed looked up from the trunk, his gum-chewing slowing. The crowd held its breath, Maya's camera zooming in, her stream now at 3,000 viewers and climbing. The morning, once soft with nostalgia, was now electric with possibility. The officers didn't know it yet, but they'd picked the wrong family, and Kian Hussein was about to make sure they never forgot it. The air in the gravel lot seemed to thicken, the heat pressing down as Kian stood between his parents and the officers, his uniform a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding. Daniels cleared his throat, his earlier confidence fraying at the edges. "We're conducting an investigation," he said, his voice less certain now. "This vehicle's plate came up as stolen in the system." Kian's eyes didn't waver, his posture unyielding. "Did you verify the VIN?" he asked, his tone calm but cutting. "Did you ask for their identification? Or did you see their names, Amir and Leila Hosseinian, decide they didn't belong here?" The accusation hung heavy, unspoken but undeniable. A truth the crowd felt in their bones. Leila's hand trembled in Amir's, her eyes fixed on her son. She saw in him the boy who'd once fallen asleep in the Cadillac's back seat, clutching a toy plane, dreaming of flying. Now he stood like a pillar, his presence commanding respect the officers hadn't offered. Amir's chest swelled with pride, though his heart ached at the necessity of this moment. He'd taught Kian to stand tall, to speak truth, to never let the world's biases define him. But he'd hoped his son would never have to use those lessons like this. In a diner parking lot, defending his parents from accusations rooted in nothing but prejudice. Reed stepped forward, the photograph still in his hand. "We're just doing our job," he said, his voice defensive. "This picture, it's suspicious. We have to check everything." Kian's gaze flicked to the photo, his jaw tightening. "That's my father, 46 years ago, standing up to a dictator. You're holding his courage like it's a crime." The crowd murmured louder, their phones capturing every word. Maya's stream now a beacon for thousands watching from across the country. A woman in the crowd, her voice thick with emotion, called out, "They're not criminals. They're our neighbors." The truck driver nodded, his arms crossed. "Amir helped me rebuild my porch last summer. Doesn't sound like a thief to me." Daniels shifted uncomfortably, his smirk gone, replaced by a tense frown. "We didn't." "No," he said, but the excuse sounded hollow. Kian shook his head, stepping closer, his voice steady but laced with steel. "You didn't ask. You didn't verify. You saw their names, their faces, and you assumed. That's not an investigation. That's intimidation." The words cut through the air, sharp and true, and the crowd's murmurs turned to a low rumble of agreement. Maya's camera caught the officer's unease, Daniels's shifting feet, Reed's averted gaze. The live stream's comments exploded. "This is why we need change. That man's a hero. Protect the Hoseinis." Leila's tears spilled over now, not from fear but from the weight of being seen, of having her son stand between her and a world that too often refused to see her humanity. Amir squeezed her hand, his own eyes glistening. They'd faced so much leaving Arain, starting over, enduring the slurs, the suspicion, the constant need to prove themselves. But this moment, with their son's voice ringing out, felt like a reclamation of something stolen long ago. The crowd was no longer just watching. They were participating, their phones a chorus of witnesses, their voices a shield. The waitress, her eyes red, stepped closer, her voice shaking. "You should be ashamed," she said to the officers. "They come here every month, always kind, always generous. This ain't right." Kian turned to the crowd, his voice steady but carrying a weight that silenced the murmurs. "My parents have lived in this town for 40 years. They've paid their taxes, raised their children, and contributed to this community. My father designed pods for NASA. My mother saved lives as a nurse. And today, you're treating them like suspects because of a glitch in your system." He paused, letting the question settle. "Or is it because of their names, their heritage?" The crowd erupted in applause, not loud but resolute, a recognition of truth spoken plainly. Maya's stream hit 5,000 viewers, the comments a flood of support and outrage, some calling for the officers' badges, others sharing their own stories of profiling. Daniels took a step back, his hands raised slightly, as if trying to reclaim control. "We're just following protocol," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Reed, still holding the photograph, looked to his partner for guidance, his earlier bravado gone. Kian didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. Protocol doesn't mean humiliating an elderly couple in front of their neighbors. You didn't follow your training. You followed your assumptions. The words were a gavel, striking at the heart of the moment. The crowd clapped again, louder this time, a wave of solidarity washing over the lot. Amir and Leila stood together, their hands clasped, their faces a mix of exhaustion and pride. They'd survived so much revolution, displacement, decades of subtle and not so subtle prejudice. But this was different. This was their son, their Kian, standing up not just for them but for every moment they'd endured in silence. Every time they'd swallowed their anger to keep the peace. The officers were faltering now, their authority unraveling under the weight of Kian's words and the crowd's gaze. Maya's camera zoomed in on Daniel's face, capturing the moment his smirk turned to unease. The live stream's comments were relentless. "This is what systemic bias looks like. Thank you, Kian, for standing up. We're with you, Hosines." The diner's owner, Earl, stepped out from the doorway, his arms still crossed, his face a mask of quiet anger. "You all done enough," he said to the officers, his voice low but firm. "Let these folks have their coffee in peace." The crowd murmured in agreement, their phones still raised, their eyes locked on the scene. A young boy, no older than 16, stepped forward, his phone shaking in his hands. "I'm posting this," he said, his voice trembling but resolute. "The world needs to see this." Maya nodded at him, her Otrim now a lifeline connecting the small Georgia town to a global audience. Kian stepped closer to his parents, placing a hand on Leila's shoulder, his eyes never leaving the officers. "You owe them an apology," he said, his voice calm but unyielding. "Not because of your system, but because of your actions. You didn't see my parents as people. You saw them as suspects, and that's where you failed." The crowd fell silent, the weight of his words settling over the lot like dust after a storm. Daniels opened his mouth, then closed it, his face flushed with something between embarrassment and defiance. Reed looked away, the photograph still clutched in his hand, as if it could shield him from the truth. The moment stretched, taut and heavy, the crowd holding its breath, Maya's camera capturing every second. The officers were cornered not by force, but by the undeniable weight of their actions, exposed in the harsh light of a Georgia afternoon. Amir and Leila stood together, their hands still clasped, their faces a testament to a lifetime of resilience. They didn't need the officer's apology to know their worth, but they deserved it. and Kian, their son, was making sure the world knew it too. The gravel lot, once a place of quiet nostalgia, was now a stage, a courtroom, a mirror held up to a system that had failed too many for too long. The crowd's phones were lights in the darkness, their voices a chorus of witnesses, their presence a reminder that justice begins when someone refuses to look away. And as Kian stood there, his uniform a symbol of service, his words a weapon of truth, the world was watching. The officers didn't know it yet, but they'd started something they couldn't stop. And the Hosseinis Amir, Leila, and Kian were at the heart of it. Their quiet Sunday drive now a spark that would burn far beyond the diner's doors. Kian, Hosseini, stood like a sentinel in the gravel lot of Millie's diner, his Air Force, uniformed crisp against the dusty Georgia afternoon, his dark eyes locked on the two officers who had turned his parents' quiet anniversary into a public humiliation. The sun beat down, casting long shadows across the Cadillac Eldorado, its cream paint still gleaming despite the officers' careless rummaging. Amir and Leila Hosseini, his parents, stood behind him, their hands clasped, their faces a mix of exhaustion and pride. Officer Daniels, the taller of the two, shifted uneasily, his earlier smirk replaced by a tense frown, while Officer Reed clutched a faded photograph from 1979, his bravado faltering under the weight of Kian's presence. The crowd, now dozens, strong, pressed closer, their phones raised, capturing every word, every flinch. Maya, the young journalist, adjusted her phone's angle, her live stream surging past 5,000 viewers, the comments a torrent of outrage and support. Kian's voice cut through the heat, calm but unyielding, each word a hammer striking at the officer's assumptions. That's my parents' car. They've owned it for 25 years. So, again, what's the problem? The question wasn't just a challenge. It was a demand for accountability, a line drawn in the gravel that the officers couldn't cross without consequence. The air was electric, the crowd no longer just spectators but participants, their murmurs a chorus of solidarity. And as Kian stood between his parents and the officers, the dynamic shifted, the weight of truth tilting the scales toward justice. Daniels cleared his throat, his hands twitching at his sides, as if searching for the authority he'd wielded so easily minutes ago. It's a system error, he said, his voice less certain now, the words sounding rehearsed, hollow. The plate came up as stolen in our database. Kian's eyes didn't waver, his posture rigid, honed by years of military discipline and courtroom battles. Did you verify the VIN? He asked, his tone measured but sharp, cutting through the officer's deflection. Did you ask for their identification? Or did you see their names, Amir and Leila Hosseinian, decide they didn't belong here? The accusation hung heavy, unspoken but undeniable, a truth that rippled through the crowd like a stone dropped. In still water, Maya's camera zoomed in, capturing Daniels' flushed face, Reed's averted gaze, the tension coiling tighter with each passing second. The live stream's comments exploded. This is why we need reform. That man's a hero. Protect the Hosseinis. Leila's hand trembled in Amir's, her silver hair catching the sunlight as she looked at her son. She saw the boy who'd once built model rockets in their backyard, dreaming of the skies. Now a man standing tall, his voice a shield against a world that too often saw their family as outsiders. Amir's chest ached, not from age but from the pride and pain of watching Kian fight a battle they'd hoped he'd never have to face. They'd raised him to believe in justice, to carry their legacy of resilience. But they'd prayed he'd never need to use it like this, in a diner parking lot. defending their dignity from accusations rooted in nothing but prejudice. Kian turned to them, his eyes softening for a moment. "Mama, Baba, you okay?" he asked, his voice low, intimate, a reminder that he was their son first, their defender second. Leila nodded, her lips pressed tight to hold back tears. Amir's voice was steady, though his hands shook on his cane. "We're fine, son. Just tired of this." Kian faced the officers again, his legal training sharpening his words like a blade. "My father helped design shuttle components for NASA," he said, his voice carrying across the lot. "My mother saved lives during the AIDS crisis, when others turned away. They're not thieves. They're not suspects. They're citizens who've contributed more to this country than you can imagine." The crowd stirred, their murmurs turning to nods of agreement. A woman in a floral dress, her hands clutching a grocery bag, called out, "Amir fixed my car when I couldn't afford a mechanic. He's a good man." A truck driver, his arms crossed, added, "Leila brought my family meals when my wife was sick. Their family to this town." The voices were a tapestry, weaving the Hosseini's life into a defense stronger than any badge. But the officers weren't backing down yet. Reed, still holding the Tehran photograph, stepped forward, his voice defensive. "This pic suspicious. We have to check everything." Kian's jaw tightened, his eyes flicking to the photo his father, young and defiant, standing in a Tehran street, holding a sign against tyranny. "That's my father, 46 years ago, fighting for freedom," Kian said, his voice steady but laced with steel. "You're holding his courage like it's a crime. You saw his name, his face, and you assumed he didn't belong. That's not an investigation, that's bias." The crowd erupted in applause, slow at first, then louder, a wave of support. That made Daniels flinch. Maya's livestream hit 10,000 viewers. The comments a flood of fury and solidarity. "This is 2025, and we're still doing this." Kian's right checked the VIN, not their heritage. "We're with you, Hosseinas." A new voice broke through the crowd, strong and clear, cutting through the heat like a breeze. "I know what this feels like," said Mrs. Jackson, a retired black schoolteacher, pushing through the onlookers with a cane of her own. Her eyes were sharp, her voice steady, carrying the weight of her history. "Last year, they stopped me on my way to church. Same excuse, system error. Said my car didn't look right to me. It's not the system, it's you." Her words landed like a spark, igniting the crowd's anger. A young man in a baseball cap nodded, his phone raised. "I saw that happen to my cousin last month." Same story. A woman with a stroller added, "They stopped my brother for looking suspicious. He was walking home from work." The crowd was no longer a collection of individuals. It was a community, their stories intertwining with the Hosseinas, their pain a shared thread. Maya's live stream was a wildfire now, spreading across platforms. The comments, a chorus of voices from Georgia to California, from London to Tehran. "This is why we march." Kian's a legend. "Justice for the Hosseinas." The diner's owner, Earl, stepped out from the doorway, his white apron dusted with flour, his face tight with disapproval. "You're done enough," he said. To the officers, his voice low but firm, "Let these folks have their coffee." The crowd murmured in agreement, their phones a constellation of lights, capturing every moment. The waitress, her eyes red, stepped closer, her voice shaking. "They come here every month, always tip, always smile. You're wrong about them." Kian's presence was a force now, his uniform a symbol of service, his words a weapon of truth. "You didn't verify the VIN," he said, his voice calm but unrelenting. "You didn't ask for their IDs. You saw their names, their heritage, and you escalated. You humiliated my parents in front of their neighbors, with no evidence, no probable cause." He paused, letting the words sink in, his eyes locked on Daniel's. "You didn't follow your training. You followed your assumptions." The crowd clapped again, louder now, a rhythm of solidarity that echoed across the lot. Maya's stream hit 15,000 viewers, the comments a flood of support. "This is what courage looks like. Kian's speaking for all of us." "The system's broken." Daniels took a step back, his hands raised slightly, as if trying to reclaim control. "We're just following protocol," he said, but his voice was thin, unconvincing. Reed looked to his partner, his earlier bravado gone, the photograph trembling in his hand. Kian shook his head, stepping closer, his voice steady but cutting. "Protocol doesn't mean tearing apart my parents' car in public. It doesn't mean accusing them of theft because of a glitch you didn't bother to check. It doesn't mean treating them like criminals because of their names." The crowd's applause was deafening now, a roar of support that made the officers flinch. The waitress wiped her eyes, her voice breaking as she spoke to the cook beside her. "This ain't right. They don't deserve this." Leila's tears spilled over, not from fear, but from the release of a lifetime's worth of indignities. She remembered the early days in America, the job interviews where her accent was a barrier, the hospitals where colleagues whispered about her foreign ways. She'd endured it all, raising Kian and Zara with a strength that came from love, not anger. Now, watching her son stand up to the officers, she felt a pride that burned brighter than the pain. Amir squeezed her hand, his own eyes glistening. He'd faced his battle's rejections at engineering firms, slurs after 9/11s, the constant need to prove his worth. But this moment, with Kian's voice ringing out, was a reclamation of something stolen long ago. The crowd was their shield now. Their phones a chorus of witnesses, their voices a defense against a system that had failed them. A low rumble interrupted the moment, the sound of tires on gravel. A second police cruiser pulled into the lot, its lights off but its presence heavy. The crowd parted, their murmurs quieting as a third officer stepped out. Sergeant Hayes, the supervisor, his uniform crisp, his face a mask of practiced neutrality. He was older, his hair graying at the temples, his eyes scanning the scene with a calculated calm. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice smooth, almost conciliatory, but with an edge that hinted at control. Kian didn't flinch, his posture unyielding. "Your officers accused my parents of stealing their car," he said, his voice steady. "They didn't verify the VIN. They didn't ask for ID. They saw their names, their heritage, and they assumed. That's what's going on." Hayes's eyes flicked to Daniels and Reed, then to the crowd, their phones still raised. "Maya's stream now at 20,000 viewers. We'll look into it," he said, his tone dismissive, as if the incident could be swept away with a wave of his hand. "Just a misunderstanding." Kian's jaw tightened, his legal training kicking in. "A misunderstanding doesn't involve dragging my father toward a cruiser," he said, his voice calm but cutting. "It doesn't involve rifling through their car without consent. It doesn't involve accusing them without evidence." The crowd murmured in agreement, their phones capturing Hayes's unease, his carefully neutral expression faltering under the weight of Kian's words. Mrs. Jackson stepped forward again, her cane tapping the gravel, her voice steady. "This Ain't the first time, she said, her eyes locked on Hayes. Your officers stopped me last year, same story. System error. You need to fix your system, or maybe you need to fix your people. The crowd erupted in applause, their voices a chorus of truth. A young man in a hoodie raised his phone, his live stream joining Maya's, his caption simple. This is our town. This stops now. The comments on Maya's stream were relentless. Sergeant Hayes, do better. The Hoseyanis deserve justice. This is why we don't trust the system. Kian turned to the crowd, his voice growing stronger, carrying across the lot like a call to arms. My parents have lived in this town for 40 years, he said. They've paid their taxes, raised their children, and contributed to this community. My father designed parts for NASA. My mother saved lives as a nurse. And today, you're treating them like criminals because of a glitch you didn't bother to check. He paused, his eyes sweeping the crowd, their faces a mix of anger and hope. This isn't just about my parents. It's about every person who's been stopped, questioned, humiliated because of their name, their skin, their heritage. It's about a system that assumes guilt before innocence. The crowd roared, their applause a thunderclap that echoed across the lot. Maya's stream hit 30,000 viewers, the comments a flood of support from across the globe. Keon's a hero. This is what leadership looks like. We're with you, Hoseyanis. The diner's owner, Earl, stepped closer, his voice low but firm. I've known Amir and Leila for 20 years, he said to Hayes. They're family to this town. You owe them an apology. The crowd nodded, their phones still raised, their eyes locked on the officers. The waitress, her apron twisted in her hands, added, They're the kindest people I know. You got this wrong. Daniels opened his mouth, then closed it, his face flushed with embarrassment. Reed looked away, the photograph still in his hand, as if it could shield him from the truth. Hayes stepped forward, his hands raised in a gesture. Of calm, we'll review the incident, he said, his voice smooth but unconvincing. We didn't mean to cause distress. Keon shook his head, his voice steady but unrelenting. You didn't cause distress. You caused harm. You humiliated my parents in front of their neighbors, with no evidence, no reason. An apology isn't just a formality, it's accountability. The crowd fell silent, the weight of Keon's words settling over the lot like a storm cloud. Maya's camera captured every moment: Hayes's tight smile, Daniels's shifting feet, Reed's averted gaze. The live stream's comments were a chorus of demands. Apologize now. This is why we need change. The Hoseyanis deserve better. Leila's tears fell freely now, not from pain, but from the release of seeing her son stand tall, his voice a beacon for every moment they'd endured in silence. Amir squeezed her hand, his eyes glistening with pride. They'd faced so much leaving. Iran, starting over, enduring the slurs, the suspicion, the constant need to prove themselves. But this moment, with Kian's voice ringing out, was a reclamation of their dignity. The crowd's applause grew louder, a rhythm of solidarity that shook the air. A young woman in a sundress stepped forward, her voice trembling but clear. I've lived here my whole life, she said. The Hoseyanis helped my family when we lost our home to a fire. They're not thieves, they're heroes. A man in a work shirt nodded, his voice rough with emotion. Amir taught my son math when he was failing. He didn't charge a dime. The voices were a chorus now, each one a thread in the tapestry of the Hosseini's life, a defense against the officer's assumptions. Hayes's face tightened, his eyes flicking to the crowd, their phones a constellation of witnesses. "We'll handle this internally," he said, his voice clipped, as if trying to close the matter. Keon stepped closer, his presence unyielding. "This isn't just internal," he said. "This is public. You made it public when you humiliated my parents, in front of their community. You don't get to walk away without accountability." The crowd roared again, their applause a demand for justice. Maya's stream hit 40,000 viewers, the comments a global outcry. "This is America in 2025. Keon's speaking the truth. We're watching." The officers were cornered now, not by force but by the weight of their actions. Exposed in the harsh light of a Georgia afternoon, Daniels mumbled something resembling an apology, his words barely audible, his face flushed with embarrassment. Reed looked away, the photograph still in his hand, as if it could shield him from the truth. Hayes's smile was tight, his eyes cold. "We'll review the protocols," he said, his voice a retreat, not a resolution. Keon shook his head, his voice calm but cutting. "Protocols don't fix prejudice. People do, and it starts with you." The crowd's applause was deafening now, a thunderclap that echoed across the lot. Maya's stream was a wildfire, spreading across platforms, the comments a chorus of voices from across the globe. The diner's owner, Earl, stepped closer, his voice low but firm. "You've done enough damage," he said to the officers. "Let these folks have their day." The waitress, her eyes red, brought out 2 cups of coffee, her hands shaking. As she set them on a nearby table on the house, she said, her voice breaking, "You don't deserve this." Keon guided his parents to the table, his hand gentle on Leila's shoulder, his eyes never leaving the officers. "You owe them an apology," he said, his voice steady, a final demand. "Not for your system, but for your actions. You didn't see my parents as people. You saw them as suspects, and that's where you failed." The crowd held its breath, their phones still raised, Maya's camera capturing every moment. The officers didn't respond, their silence a confession of sorts. Hayes nodded stiffly, gesturing for Daniels and Reed to return to their cruiser. The retreat was quiet, uneasy, but unmistakable. Leila sat down, her hands trembling as she reached for the coffee, the warmth of the cup a small comfort against the morning's wounds. Amir sat beside her, his cane resting against the table, his eyes glistening with pride and pain. They didn't need the officer's apology to know their worth, but they deserved it. And Keon, their son, had made sure the world knew it too. The crowd began to thin, but those who remained stayed with purpose, their phones still raised, their voices a chorus of support. Maya's stream hit 50,000 viewers, the comments a global demand for justice. "This is why we fight. Keon's a hero. The Hosseinis are our neighbors." The gravel lot, once a place of quiet nostalgia, was now a stage, a courtroom, a mirror held up to a system that had failed too many for too long. The Hosseinis, Amir, Leila, and Keon stood at the heart of it. Their quiet Sunday drive now, a spark that would burn far beyond the diner's doors. The officer's cruiser pulled away, its lights off, its presence a fading shadow. But the residue of their actions lingered, a reminder that justice wasn't won with a single stand, but with a community that refused to look away. The air inside Millie's diner was thick with the scent of fresh coffee and the lingering weight of what had unfolded in the gravel lot outside. The Georgia sun dipped lower, casting golden fingers across the chipped red siding of the diner, its neon sign. flickering like a heartbeat in the fading light. Amir and Leila Hossein sat at a corner table, their hands clasped, the warmth of a ceramic coffee cup grounding them after the storm of humiliation they'd endured. Their son, Kian, sat across from them, his Air Force uniform still pristine. Despite the chaos, his dark eyes scanning the room with a quiet intensity. The crowd that had gathered in the lot, neighbors, strangers, witnesses, had begun to thin. But those who remained lingered with purpose, their phones still raised, their faces a mix of anger, empathy, and resolve. Maya, the young journalist, whose live stream had turned a quiet Sunday into a global conversation, stood by the counter, her phone now recording the softer moments. Leila's trembling smile, Amir's steady grip on his cane, Kian's protective presence. The officers Daniels, Reed, and their supervisor, Sergeant Hayes, had retreated. Their cruiser a fading speck on Highway 17, but the wounds they'd left behind were still raw, tender in ways only dignity can be when bruised in public. Yet, in the diner's warmth, surrounded by small acts of kindness, a free slice of pecan pie, a bouquet of wildflowers, a nod of respect, the Hosseiners found something new, not just pain, but purpose. Their quiet anniversary had become a spark, and the world was watching. Leila lifted the coffee cup to her lips, her hands still faintly shaking, the rich, dark brew a small anchor against the morning's chaos. She looked at Amir, his face lined with the years they'd shared, 45 of them, through revolution, displacement, and the slow grind of prejudice in a country they'd made their home. "This tastes like home," she said softly, her voice a mix of grief and gratitude. The cinnamon and sugar of the pie curling around her senses like a memory of her mother's kitchen in Tehran. Amir smiled faintly, his hand resting on hers, grounding her as he always had. "Only sweeter," he said, his voice low, steady, "because you earned it." Kian watched them, his heart heavy with pride and pain. He saw their resilience, the loud kind, not the kind you read about in history books, but the quiet kind, the kind that gets up the next day and forgives the world just enough to try again. The diner was a sanctuary now, its wooden tables and checkered floor a refuge from the gravel lot's harsh spotlight. The waitress, her apron dusted with flour, her eyes red from what she'd witnessed, approached with a fresh pot of coffee. "This one's on the house," she said, her voice breaking as she poured, her hands trembling as much as Leila's, "and the pie, too. You've been through enough." Kian nodded his thanks, his eyes softening for a moment, but his posture remained rigid, his mind already turning to the next steps. He was a lawyer, trained to see beyond the moment, to build a case, to seek justice not just for his parents, but for everyone the system had failed. The crowd's murmurs filled the diner, their voices a soft hum of support. A woman in a sundress, her hands clutching a small bouquet of wildflowers, stepped forward and placed it gently on the table. "I don't know you," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "but I'm sorry. You shouldn't have gone through that. No one should." Leila's lips trembled, not from the coffee or the pie, but from the kindness, from being seen, respected, held in care after being handled so carelessly. A teenage boy, no older than 16, approached hesitantly, his phone still in his hand, his eyes wide with a mix of awe and indignation. "My mum said I should delete the video if you don't want it out there," he said, his voice shaking but sincere. "But if you do, I'll post it with your words, not the officers, yours." Kian looked at his parents, his eyes searching. For their permission, Leila nodded, her voice soft but resolute. Let the world see, she said. So maybe it won't happen again to someone else. The boy nodded solemnly, stepping back to upload his video, his fingers flying across the screen. Maya, still by the counter, gave him a small smile. Her stream now at 60,000 viewers. The comments a global chorus. This is why we fight. The Hosseinis are heroes. Justice now. The diner's owner, Earl, emerged from the kitchen, his white apron dusted with flour, his grey hair catching the light. He placed a fresh pecan pie in a to-go box on the table, his eyes meeting Amir's with a quiet nod. The gesture was simple, but its meaning was clear. I saw what happened. I see you now. Amir returned the nod, his hand tightening on his cane, his heart heavy with the weight of the moment. He remembered the early days in this town, the whispers when they'd first moved in, the neighbors who'd warmed to them only after years of proving their worth. Leila had brought casseroles to new families. Amir had tutored kids in math, fixed bikes, and rebuilt porches. They'd woven themselves into the fabric of this community, and now that fabric was holding them up. Kian leaned forward, his voice low, meant only for his parents. I'm filing a formal complaint, he said, his eyes burning with purpose. This doesn't end here. They can't just walk away. Amir nodded, his voice steady. We trust you, son. Do what's right. Leila reached across the table, her hand finding Kian's, her eyes glistening. You made them see us, Kian, she said softly. That's enough for now. But Kian shook his head, his jaw tight. It's not enough, Mama. Not until they're held accountable. Not until this stops happening. The words were a vow, a promise forged in the heat of the moment. A commitment to a fight that was bigger than their family. Outside, the gravel lot was quieter now, the crowd thinning as some returned to their cars, their phones still buzzing with notifications from Maya's stream. But those who stayed were there with a purpose, their faces a mix of anger and hope. Mrs. Jackson, the retired schoolteacher who'd spoken out in the lot, approached the table, her cane tapping the wooden floor. I meant what I said out there, she told them, her voice steady, her eyes sharp with shared pain. This happened to me, too. Last year, they stopped me on my way to church, said my car didn't look right to me. I was 68 years old, born and raised here, and they treated me like a stranger. Leila reached out, her hand finding Mrs. Jackson's, a silent bond forming between them. We're not strangers, Leila said softly. Not anymore. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, their stories spilling out like water from a broken dam. A truck driver, his work shirt stained with grease, stepped forward. Amir helped my son with his math homework when he was failing, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Didn't charge a dime. Just sat with him every week until he passed. A young barista, her apron still tied, nodded. Leila brought me soup when my mom was in the hospital. She sat with me, listened, there. Good people. The voices were a chorus now, each one a thread in the tapestry of the Hosseini's life, a defense against the officer's assumptions. Maya's stream captured it all, the comments a flood of support. This is community. The Hosseinis are our neighbors. We're with you, Kian listened, his heart heavy with pride and pain. He'd served overseas, led missions, in deserts half a world away, fought for ideals he believed in. But this fight in a small-town diner, for his parents' dignity, was the hardest battle he'd ever faced. He pulled out his phone, drafting a formal complaint to the sheriff's department, his fingers steady despite the anger burning in his chest. He knew the system, knew how it worked, knew how it failed. He'd seen it in courtrooms, in the stories of clients who'd been profiled, dismissed, dehumanized. But this was personal. This was his parents' anniversary turned into a spectacle, their lives reduced to a system error. Maya approached the table, her phone still in hand, her eyes bright with purpose. "I'm writing a story about this," she said, her voice steady but urgent. "It's already going viral, but I want to get it right. Can I talk to you, all of you?" Kian nodded, his voice low. "Do it. Tell the world who they are, not what those officers assumed." Leila smiled faintly, her hand still in Amir's. "Tell them we're just people," she said softly. "People who wanted coffee and pie." Maya nodded, her fingers already typing notes, her mind racing with the story that was unfolding, a story not just of injustice, but of resilience, of community, of a son who stood up when it mattered most. The diner was a hub now, a gathering place for a town forced to confront its reflection. Locals drifted in and out, some offering words of support, others sharing their own stories of profiling, of suspicion, of being made to feel like outsiders in their own home. A young man in a hoodie, his phone still raised, approached the table. "I posted the video," he said, his voice trembling with excitement. "It's got 10,000 views already. People are angry, but they're also inspired. They're talking about you, Kian, about how you stood up." Kian shook his head, his eyes on his parents. "It's not about me," he said. "It's about them. It's about everyone who's been through this." The sun dipped lower, the sky turning a deep amber, casting long shadows across the diner's windows. The crowd's energy hadn't faded, but it had shifted from anger to resolve, from outrage to action. Mrs. Jackson sat down at a nearby table, her cane resting against her chair, her eyes sharp with determination. "We need to do something," she said, her voice carrying across the room. "Not just for the Hosseinis, but for all of us. This can't keep happening." The crowd nodded, their murmurs a chorus of agreement. A woman in a nurse's uniform, just off her shift, spoke up. "I've seen this too many times at the hospital, patients treated differently because of their names, their accents. We need to talk about this out loud." Kian looked at his parents, his heart swelling with pride. They'd taught him to fight, not with fists but with truth, with persistence, with love. He stood, his voice steady, addressing the room. "My parents didn't ask for this," he said, his eyes sweeping the crowd. "They wanted a quiet anniversary, a slice of pie, a moment to themselves. But they got this instead, a reminder that the system still sees them as suspects first, people second. We can't let that stand." The crowd erupted in applause, their hands clapping in a rhythm that echoed the heartbeat of the town. Maya's stream hit 70,000 viewers, the comments a global demand for change. "This is why we need reform. Kian's a leader. The Hosseinis are us." Earl, the diner's owner, approached the table again, his hands clasped in front of him. "I'm hosting a community meeting here tomorrow night," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I want everyone to come, Amir, Leila, Kian, all of you. We need to talk about what happened, about how we move forward." Leila nodded, her eyes glistening. "We'll be there," she said softly. Amir squeezed her hand, his voice steady. "We've always been here. We're not going anywhere." The crowd murmured in agreement, their phones still raised, their voices a chorus of support. Maya's story was taking shape now, her notes a mosaic of the Hosseinis' lives, their journey from Iran, their contributions to the town, their quiet resilience in the face of prejudice. She approached Kian, her voice urgent. "I found something," she said, her eyes bright with discovery. "Sergeant Hazy's connected to a local group, one that's been pushing anti-migrant policies in the county. It's not just a system error, it's deeper." Kian's jaw tightened, his mind racing. "Keep digging," he said. "We need evidence. We need the truth." Maya nodded, her fingers already typing, her story now a beacon for a town ready to confront its shadows. The diner's air was alive with possibility, the hum of conversation a testament to a community waking up. Locals shared stories, not just of the Hoseyinis, but of their encounters with bias, with suspicion, with a system that too often failed them. A young barista, her voice trembling, spoke of being followed in stores because of her dark skin. Truck driver shared how his Mexican heritage had made him a target at traffic stops. The stories were a chorus, each one a note in a song of resilience and resistance. Kian listened, his heart heavy but resolute. He knew this was just the beginning, that the fight for justice was long, that the system wouldn't change overnight. But he also knew that his parents' dignity, their strength, was a spark that could light a fire. Leila cut into the pecan pie, her hands steadier now, the sweetness a reminder of the life they'd built. She looked at Amir, her eyes soft with love. "We didn't ask for this," she said, her voice low but clear. "But maybe we were meant for it." Amir nodded, his hand finding hers, his eyes glistening. "Maybe we were," he said. Kian reached across the table, his hand resting on theirs, a silent vow to keep fighting. "You were," he said softly, "and I'm here with you." The diner's door jingled as more locals arrived, drawn by Maya's stream, by the whispers spreading through the town. The crowd was a community now, their stories intertwined, their resolve a force that couldn't be ignored. The Hosseini sat together, their coffee cooling, their pie half-eaten, but their hearts full. They'd been seen, not as suspects but as people, as neighbors, as heroes. The officers' retreat was a small victory, but the real triumph was in the diner, in the voices, in the phones that had captured a moment of truth. As the sun sank below the horizon, the sky a tapestry of orange and purple, the Hosseinis stood to leave, arm in arm, the wildflowers in Leila's hand a symbol of the community's care. The diner's door closed behind them with a soft jingle, not a finale but a pause in a story. That was far from over. Maya's stream hit 100,000 viewers, her story now national news, the comments a global call for justice. "This is our fight. The Hosseinis are our family. Change starts now." The gravel lot, once a place of humiliation, was now a stage for something greater, a spark of reckoning, a moment where truth refused to back down. And as the Hosseinis drove away in their Cadillac, the world was watching, ready to carry their story forward.